Well, I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and I'll introduce myself as my screen is being shared. So I'm Sheila. I'm Signet's president and CEO. So I've been COO for a very long time. I was just promoted to CEO, and it's taking some getting used to say that title. But really excited to have you all here today to talk about what really matters in college admissions and selective college admissions. I know this is a hot topic. It's probably the question I get asked, I don't know, 20, 30 times a week. And I have an answer that I'm really excited to share with you all. Um, so before we, dive into our content, I do like to know who I'm talking to. I recognize some of your names, but it'd be helpful for me to hear, where you're calling in from, how old your students are, and what your biggest concerns are. And I will also start us off with some reflection questions. Um, if you can, tell me in just a few words what you think actually matters in college admissions. So let's have you put that in the chat. Um, I hear all sorts of things, and there's no one answer that encapsulate everything. But I know a lot of us come into this having some clear ideas or clear expectations of what we think matters in this process. So tell us in the chat, what do you think matters in selective college admissions? Okay. ED, I think you mean early decision, maybe overall student body, authenticity and how students present themselves, grades and extracurriculars. Yes, absolutely. Institutional priorities. Thank you, Meg. Yes, we will talk about that today. Other kids at the same school. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Consistency of narrative, self-story goals and priorities. Well, we've got some very informed parents in the group here, so this will be a great session. Now, given that these are the things we assume matters, authenticity, grades, their competition, how does that make you feel about your kids' prospects for college? Are we feeling good? Are we feeling confident? I don't think you would be here if you all were, but hopefully we're somewhere along that spectrum. How do we feel? Not so much. Okay, not so confident. Anybody else want to share how they're feeling about this? A little defeated. Yes, Leslie. Oh, sad face, Alex. Yeah, absolutely. We're worried, right? We're really worried. And just at sea, oh my gosh, such beautiful language to describe that. Yeah, where do we go? How are we going to survive this? Given that we're feeling that way, we think we know what matters. We're feeling like, oh gosh, we have no chance. How does that make you feel about yourself as a parent? I know I'm asking the real questions here. Helpless, stress, yeah, another helpless. Right. Lost, defeated. Thank you so much for chiming in. Frustrated. But here we are sharing our, most vulnerable feelings, that we're feeling defeated as parents, lost. We don't know how to help our kids. We're stressed about their prospects for the future. We don't really know what matters, right? I want you to take some comfort in the fact that you're among a whole bunch of other people who feel the same way. You are not the only people feeling this way. You're not the only people with these questions. And I think the more we can confide in each other, the better off we will all be. And so with that spirit today, I want to take you through what actually matters in college admissions and how you can start to navigate those feelings, especially when you're feeling lost or lost at sea. How do we start to navigate that with some confidence so that our students also have more confidence in themselves, in our guidance as parents, and that, at the end of the day, we all come through this with our relationships, our sanity intact, and some great college choices. Right? I want your kids to have all of the options so that they can grow into the people that they are meant to be. Right? So that's what we're here to talk about today. So as we have just established, if I can get things working again, We are feeling quite stressed, like this mother in the picture. I heard from a parent that I was talking to just a week or two ago. She said, in this process, it feels like you're everything or you're nothing. Like if your kid is not the top of their class, winning all the awards, getting the highest scores and grades, then they've got no prospects. Why should they even bother? Right? Of course, I corrected her that that's not actually true, but that is how it feels, and that's definitely kind of the media narrative that's going on here. Um, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, what chance does my kid actually have if this is what we're up against? And then many of us are probably also feeling like, am I becoming one of those parents? Am I becoming so, anxious and controlling and micromanaging that I'm going to be pushing my kid away by pushing them to do things that I think will be important for their college process? And that is a hard line to walk, let me tell you. And it is probably the biggest reason people seek out my advice is because they want to get through this without losing themselves or their kid in the process. So I'm going to get right into it and tell you this is what we do. I call this the match pyramid. And colleges are looking for a match. They are not just looking for the best, right? Even though a college application asks for grades and extracurriculars and all of these sort of elements of a student's educational profile, they're not just looking for the people who are at the tippy top of each of those categories. They are selecting, it's not a competition, it is a selection. They are selecting for match, right? They know that the better a student matches their academic profile and rigor, their particular values and philosophy about the world, their institutional priorities, somebody mentioned those earlier, the better off that student is going to be in their school, right? That student is going to succeed academically and socially, and is going to also contribute something remarkable to their campus, right? And I know that these are fairly abstract terms. I'm going to break them down for you. And as we go through each one of these, I want you to kind of think about, where does your kid fall? And where are some gaps we might be able to fill? Or how is this going to give you a new way to talk about the college process with your child, right? I also want to point out before we start our kind of deep dive here, that you can't have any one layer of this pyramid without the others. There are some general priorities here, like academics is the broadest, strongest foundation you want to set for yourself. And then values, and then that sort of remarkable factor is like your edge. That's like the thing that they're really selecting for. But you can't have a remarkable factor and terrible grades. You can't not have a clear values match, but a really strong academic profile and expect to get selected, right? These three things have to go together. And I'm hoping that this gives you some confidence that you don't have to choose between raising a good human and going to a good college, or helping them get to a good college. And I'll talk more about that as we go. Some broad definitions first. Academics is, how are they doing in school? Their grades, their test scores, their executive functions fall into this category. Values, who are they as a person? What is meaningful to them? What do they see as maybe their purpose, if they have one yet? That's always changing, of course. And how do they treat other people? How do they show up as a person? And then that remarkable factor is like the thing that makes them special. And I will tell you this, and most parents don't believe me, but they already have it. You just don't know what it is. They may not know what it is, but it is already in their DNA. It is already a major part of their life. You just need someone with sort of a broader perspective to help you see what that is, so that you all can lean into it. This is not something you're going to go and invent out of whole cloth. Same with values. Same with academics. You're not going to turn them into a straight A student if they're just not one, right? You can close the gap and help them get better academic skills and executive functions in place so that they can perform better. But we can't turn students into something that they're not. And that's a message you might hear me say often in this presentation. We need to be thinking about the college process for the student that you actually have, because we want them to be successful in college. We're not going to be choosing ideal colleges for an ideal student that has no bearing to the reality of your students' academic abilities or character or their interests, right? This won't work if we're trying to do it that way. All right, let's go and take our deep dive into academics. So, as I mentioned, this is how your student does in school. There are a couple of ways that colleges will assess academic ability in the application. They are looking at your overall GPA. They are looking at your grades in your most advanced classes, and they are looking at the rigor of your curriculum. If they require it or accept them, they will also look at test scores like the SAT or the ACT. To some extent, they're going to look at AP and IB and other types of scores, but those tend not to be as important as the SAT and the ACT. Again, if the colleges that you're looking at require them, there are still many that do not require testing, and there are still some that are test blind, like the University of California system. Doesn't matter what your score is, they're not looking at it. And underlying those things is executive functions. This is kind of the functions of the brain that help you get things done. This is time management, organization, setting priorities, impulse control, and things like that. If these are weak in a student, you may feel like they're not reaching their potential or they're not putting in enough effort. You may call them lazy. But oftentimes what this is that there is a set of skills that they have not fully developed yet or learned to accommodate, right? And we could talk more about executive functions if this is something that seems like it is relevant to your student. And it's certainly much more common after the pandemic that students didn't have a chance to really develop these executive functions. And so they tend to be a little weak. Kids don't know how to study. They're not organized. They're procrastinating. All of these things kind of fall into that category. And as you can kind of tell, if you have some challenges in executive functions, that's going to show up in your academic performance. If you don't know how to study for a test, you probably won't do that well on a test, or maybe you could do better. And so executive function is not something they're explicitly measuring on the application form. They're not asking for a neuropsychological evaluation or anything like that. But they are indirectly measuring them by looking at your academic performance and, of course, looking at your extracurriculars and how you manage all of that together. Now, this is probably pretty obvious to all of you. Many of you said, well, grades are really important in the application process. And truthfully, this is the most important thing, right? So we start with the foundations. A lot of college admissions consulting companies or independent educational consultants, this is kind of where they stop. Right? Let's make sure the academics are really strong and you're just doing the best you can in these areas, and then we're going to apply to the colleges, right? But I will show you that there's more to the puzzle than just these foundational pieces. And before I do that, I want to show you some of the ways that this is measured. So I'm going to show you. This is a screenshot of the actual form that high school counselors fill out when they are supporting their students applying to college. This is part of a common application. You can Google common application school report counselor form, and you will find this form. It's not a secret to anybody, but this is one of those things that your student doesn't actually see or fill out themselves, so you may not be as aware of it. And as you can see here, some of this information is just sort of general information about the school itself, right? What kind of school are we talking about? What's the setting? What kind of courses are offered? Is there a block schedule? And things like that. Then they're asking, do you rank your students? And how do you rank your students? And they do actually say, what is the student's rank? Right? So if a school ranks, they're gonna ask for that. Then there's some information about how they calculate a GPA, what the school considers passing, and then again, the student's cumulative GPA. And then down here is where I really want to draw your attention. They're asking about the curriculum. that this student has taken, the classes that the student has chosen to take, how do they compare to other students who are on the college track? Is this demanding, very demanding, most demanding? How much is your student pushing themselves? So in conjunction with looking at a transcript and the grades that your student has earned in their classes, they're trying to assess how hard are these classes and how do they compare maybe to other schools' curriculum. And so this can be a really important part of the context that a college admissions officer is considering when they're evaluating your specific student. And a general rule is they want to see students taking the hardest classes that they can do well in. Right. And this is how they can tell that. And this is how they compare apples to apples across different school districts and even educational systems like IB or maybe the Cambridge system versus the US system. Right. So here's your proof. This is what they're looking at, and this is how they do it. All right, let's move on to values. So values has become a really kind of popular buzzword. It's certainly, buzzword in sort of the corporate world. Everybody's got to have their core values. And we at Signet take values really seriously. They are not just like words on the wall. They are how we interact with clients, interact with students, interact with each other. They really determine even our messaging that we use in our marketing and our website. We don't use fear, right? We are very strengths-based, very values-based, and we want that to show up everywhere we are. And just like that, you want your student to have a sense of what their core values are and make sure that they're living them. And of course, we're talking about teenagers, and how are you going to have a conversation with them about values? It can be, uncomfortably earnest. They may not be ready to discuss this with you, but I do find that younger generations are much more in touch with their sort of principles and where they draw boundaries. And that is part and parcel of the values conversation. Who are you as a person? What kind of behavior standards do you hold yourself to? What do you admire in other people that you look up to or that you're friends with? What's a deal breaker for you if somebody is this way or isn't this way? Is that somebody you're going to hang out with or not hang out with, or respect maybe, or not even respect? And this is important to colleges, as I said, because they want to make sure that a student has a real sense of belonging on their campus, right? So they're selecting for people who really match whatever it is that the school's philosophy is. We can talk about, like Georgetown, for example, talks a lot about diversity and inclusivity and service to others. So we understand what their values are. And students who have demonstrated those values in their lives through their interactions with their peers, with their teachers, through wherever they're spending their time outside of school, their extracurriculars, they are demonstrating what their values are. So we want students to reflect on where does their time go and what's meaningful to them, and kind of crystallize them into a set of values that then they can use to evaluate, are they a match for the school or is the school a match for them? Right. And this is not about saying, oh, Georgetown values this thing, so I'm going to go out and be this way. Right. These things are judged over a long period of time with, students have to show up with a lot of consistency. So these have to be authentic, true values to themselves. But the way colleges look at these is they're looking at the extracurriculars. Where is a student choosing to spend their time? We live in a world where everybody is overscheduled. So if a student is dedicating time to something, it must be meaningful to them. What are those things, and what does that say about what the student's priorities and values are? A student's essays are a chance for a student to talk about some of those values. They'll tell stories about when they made a decision about something, or they had to resolve a conflict, or they got really motivated about something and they grew in some particular way. And those are really all value stories. So that's, one of the big places that colleges will look. But the other place, sort of like this form that I just showed you, is in the teacher recommendations. Right. And now teacher recommendations consist of two main parts. The first part of the teacher recommendation looks like this. this is a screenshot from last year's teacher recommendation form. It hasn't changed much in 20 some years, but they are rating the student using the series of checkboxes on various qualities. And there's really only one around academics. All the rest are kind of values, right? Intellectual promise, quality of writing, maybe that's an academic one, but creative thought, productive discussion, faculty respect, disciplined habits. This is where those executive functions come back in. So if your student is struggling with having disciplined habits, that's a place you might want to invest some time and energy in helping them build those. Maturity, motivation, leadership, integrity, reaction to setbacks. I was actually able to obtain my Harvard application from, I won't tell you what year. They've made them public to all alumni. And I was looking at my teacher recommendations, and there were, this foremost ranking, one of the top I've ever encountered in my career for all of these except reaction to setbacks. And I have to say that's probably pretty accurate to who I was when I was a teenager. But just goes to show you, 25 years ago, that was still a question they were asking. So this is where those values really show up. And it's not, integrity is not saying you have to have this specific value. Integrity is how much a student lives in alignment with their values. That's integrity, right? Leadership, yeah, okay, that's maybe a particular kind of value, but different students show leadership in a lot of different ways. They don't have to be the most outspoken person. They don't have to be the president of the club to show leadership qualities. Concern for others, I think, is a really great one too, because, how a student interacts with their peers in the classroom, in the hallway, is something that teachers will remark on. And if they can show up, living their values all day, every day, teachers are going to notice this, and it will make it into their recommendation. So that's really the way you go about this. And I show you this to, again, highlight that point that you don't have to choose between raising a good human and getting into a good college. Right? Convey your family values to your student, help them understand their values for themselves, and they will show up as a self-aware, mature person with a lot of integrity. And that will show up in their recommendations. And of course, that will also help them in the college process. And what I love about the way we do this work, and it's the reason I do this work day in and day out, is because there's these twin goals that I think are both really important. And, I know all of us are here to talk about what really matters in college admissions, but think about it. This is your last set of years with your teenager. They are going off to college, living on their own, making choices for themselves as a young adult, right? Not fully fledged adult yet. And you want to make sure you are setting them up for success in life, not just getting them into a college, right? So following this sort of strategy, this framework, allows you to do that and feel confident you're sending your kid off ready for that next stage of their life, not just, oh, they got in, let's hope everything goes well after they get in, right? They're ready for the opportunities that await them. And also by filtering the colleges that you apply to and eventually the college that you select to enroll at by the values fit and by all these other fits, your student is going to be successful there. It's not just, let's get into the best brand name we can and hope for the best. Right? It's let's find the place where our student is really going to thrive and find their people and get set up for the next step in their life. All right. The third element of our match pyramid is the remarkable factor. I'm going to take a sip of water. Now, this is where a student's talents, interests, natural strengths, like I said, they already have this. You may not know what it is. But all of those things match what the college is looking for. So it's like the final piece of the puzzle, right? They can have the academic foundation, they can have the values fit. But if they don't have this thing that a college is actually looking for, the institutional priorities we were talking about earlier, they likely won't get selected, right? And when we're talking about the most selective colleges, they're getting 60,000 applications. If we look at like the UCs, they're getting over 100,000 applications for the spots in their school. And most of these schools can fill their classes a couple times over with valedictorians and students who have scores in the 99th percentile and, all of these things. So it's not enough to make sure you have the academics or the scores or even the values. This thing is the thing that means this student is a great match for this school, right? And I mentioned that finances sometimes plays into this match. If you are applying to a need-aware college, they may look at how much financial aid do you need, and does that mean you are a match for our school, right? So keep that in mind as well. And let me tell you how you can tell, not necessarily what your student's remarkable factor is, but what a college's institutional priorities are. Now, there are lots of ways to get a sense of this, and they don't just come out and say it. It's a little unfortunate, but we can, keep advocating for more transparency from their side. But there are things that you can look at to help you understand what their priorities are. And these priorities range, right? Like they may want to be building a new major out. They may have started a new center for something, and then they need, scholars and students to come in and populate it. They may need a new bassoon player because everybody has graduated from the school orchestra, or they have recruitment goals for an athletic team. Right, the seniors are graduating, we need a new kicker, or whatever it may be. And so those are different sorts of pieces that you can look at, especially if that's one of your students' talents or interests. But what I've got here are just a couple of headlines from a few different colleges. And if you just go to a college website, there's always like a news feed on it. I encourage you to look at that as you're researching these colleges to, check if they're a fit for your student. Because you can tell a lot from what they are touting and where they are investing their money. So I'll let you read some of these, but I'll talk to you about Carnegie Mellon here. Now, Carnegie Mellon, I think stereotypically is seen as a very rigorous STEM-focused school. They also have a different academic unit for different types of subjects. So there is a school of computer science, there's a school of arts and humanities, there's a school of I don't remember exactly what they call it, but the other sciences are in another school. So there are these sort of siloed institutions within the overall college. It really gives the impression of not only just being this rigorous STEM institution, but also that it's not very interdisciplinary. There's not a lot of collaboration or creativity. But one of the things Carnegie Mellon actually really does have amazing strengths in is in the arts, right? Theater and actual like an art school. And what they just announced, this was like within the last month, they just broke ground on this new building. And I can't remember how many millions of dollars they spent on it, but it's a lot of money. And the real headline here is that it's going to bring together science, technology, and art in one building. And this not only goes to kind of counteract that maybe prevailing narrative of like a STEM school that's very rigid and separated, with a center that is meant to be extremely interdisciplinary and collaborative. But it's also telling us they need students who are interdisciplinary and collaborative. Right? So if your student, I've had lots of students like this, like, how do I choose? I love poetry, but I'm also a bio major. What do I do with this? Those students have a great home here at Carnegie Mellon, and maybe it would have been overlooked because of what they previously thought about the school. But this also helps them know, oh, I got to tell them this story about how I did this creative project and I collaborated with, all of these technologists or whatever it was. It helps you understand how to position yourself for that college. Now, you might not do that in your main college essay, but most of these colleges do have smaller supplemental essays where you can start to speak very specifically to what you have gauged their priorities to be. I'll just speak very briefly about the Colby and Muhlenberg headlines here. These are two small liberal arts colleges that most people don't think you go to study hard science or technology. But Colby just received a gift to build up computational and data science, right? So they are going to be looking for students who definitely overlooked Colby if they were looking for a CS degree or data science degree. Colby was not where they were looking. But now this is a real opportunity for students. In the Muhlenberg headline, I actually included some of the article here too, because it shows you that when they invest in projects like this, it's not just about, improving their campus and reducing their carbon footprint. They're getting opportunities for their students to do internships and site visits. They're going to have a classroom in this renewable energy project. So that's a really amazing hands-on way for students to learn, right? So they're investing in this area and they're giving new opportunities to students. So that might be really interesting to a student who otherwise would never have considered Muhlenberg College to go and study renewable energy. All right, I hope that gives you a sense of what I'm talking about here when we're talking about the match, right? And now what the thing to do is to think about, how do you take this information back to your student? What do you do with it, right? I've showed you that these are the three things, these three big buckets that colleges look at and are selecting for. But what does that mean now, right? And at Signet, we kind of take these three steps. And this actually maybe should have been a circular diagram, because we're going to do it over and over and over again. The first place we focus, like our little cat here, we look in the mirror and we reflect. Who am I? What are my values? What are my strengths? What are the moments I'm really proud of? What are the things I'm really interested in, whether I think it's special or not, or I may be embarrassed that I love this thing this much. What are those things? Because like I said, students don't often know how amazing they are. They always are. And it takes somebody with a perspective like mine, or the people on my team, where we've worked with thousands of students. We've read thousands of applications. We really understand what's different about your student against everybody else. And you and your student, you see each other all the time. You might not know that they're that special. Or you may have, some other frame of reference of comparison. So we help them reflect in sort of a safe space without judgment, to really get to know themselves and not shy away from that, because that is really a big part of just adolescence in general, trying to figure out who you are and who you want to be and how do you get yourself on that path, right? So that's where it starts. Discover yourself. And it does take time. And I'll give you a timeline in a minute. Then we do this thing we call run the pyramid, which really is about taking what we learned in that discovery and applying it to the match framework of saying, okay, where are we academically? Do we feel like we could be a little stronger with this academic skill or this executive function? Are there things that you can already see? Oh, that's not me at my full potential for this part of the pyramid, right? Just really honest self-assessment. Then the values. Where are your values right now? Where do we not have clarity? Do we have we captured a value for the significant parts of your life? And then, of course, the top of our triangle, what's remarkable about you? And it's really, one of the joys of my work is to get a student to see how remarkable they are and really start to believe in themselves in a new way. It's really fantastic. But as we run this pyramid, we're always noting, hey, we could get better at this, or maybe we change that, or maybe there's a book I can read that will help me get clear on this value, or delve deeper into this subject that I think might be my remarkable factor. And that's what we call bridging the gaps. Right? And this is not a mad scramble to turn themselves into something they're not. It is not, rescue mission or laying a fake layer over top of whoever they are. As you can see my image here, this girl, even though she's walking through a jungle on a pretty slim little bridge there, she looks really confident, and she's excited about what's on the other side of that bridge, right? And that's the kind of posture we want to take here. We may not be able to close all of the gaps. And in those cases, especially if you're in the stage where you're starting to evaluate colleges for your college list, if that gap is not closable, like this college is really looking for an average 3.9 GPA and your student's down in the twos, we can't, change history and close that gap. We can shorten it, right? And of course, we want to do everything we can, but this is really helpful for students to, do a self-assessment, see where they are in the present moment, and look at where they want to be and start to put plans in place to close those gaps. Right. And then every so often, we're going to do this all over again, right? Usually every 3 months, we're kind of doing this with students where we're reflecting, are these still our values? Are these still our priorities? Are these still your interests? Are we still doing good on our academics, at least at what we expected? And are there other gaps that we can close, right? So rinse and repeat is the name of the game here. Excuse me. And we also want to think about what is your role here. Now, of course, you parents play such an important role in this, but you can't do too much, especially as we are trying to get these young teenagers to turn into adults. We have to know kind of when to step in and when to hold back, when to let them try something on their own, when to let them ask us for help instead of swooping in and giving the help that we think that they need. So my recommendation here is you can hold the framework, but they have to engage in the growth, right? They have to do the reflection. You may sit with them and brainstorm, hey, I remember this thing happened, and it seems to me one of your core values might be this, right? Perfectly fine. You can't say, here's a list of your core values. I thought about it. You don't have to do any work. Okay. This is about engaging them in the process, giving them some ownership of the process of developing themselves into who they're going to be. And again, I want to say you don't have to choose between raising a good human and getting into a good college, right? You may have some work to do to figure out what good means in terms of good college. But the goal here is to help your kid, navigate high school successfully and get to the right place for them to launch them into their own adulthood and career and broader lives. Okay. I promised you a timeline. This is our timeline here. This is how we proceed through things at Signet when we get the great joy of working with a student as young as 9th grade. You can see 9th and 10th grade are really about laying the groundwork. We are thinking about meaningful goals, understanding your course progression, learning to reflect, exploring things, and really just kind of plotting what are we trying to achieve here and bringing them along in this process. All the while, we're also helping them kind of adjust to high school, navigate their academics, making sure that their academic skills are where they need to be so that we can start to focus on this next layer. As we round the corner here between 10th and 11th grade, I realize some of you may be in this little valley right here. This is when we start to think about, okay, what's your testing strategy? We like to do diagnostic tests and review them and say, okay, SAT or ACT or no test. And that really informs the building of the college list, which is what we do in the fall of 11th grade. And we are starting to think about, where are the other places you can demonstrate your leadership and all of that so that they're in the best position to apply to the colleges that end up on that list. And then we start to think about, okay, what's the story that we want to tell? Once we have our list, what are the values of these colleges and what stories can you tell that demonstrate those values? And if there are a couple of common values across all those colleges, which hopefully there are, that might be a great topic for your main essay. Now, if you have questions about essays, our session in June is going to be all about essays, so stay tuned for that. And then as we get between the summer of 11th and 12th grade, we're writing all of those essays and preparing all of the materials so that we can, review, polish, proofread, and submit. And then after that, we're thinking about, okay, what else do we need to do to prepare for the college transition? Because, of course, college is just the beginning of the journey. It's not the end, right? So we want to keep that in perspective and make sure that they're able to use the kind of framework and reflection and experimentation and iteration process that we've just taken them through and continue applying it as they move through college and into their adult life. Okay. I'm going to take another sip of water. I should say, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We are going to have, well, hopefully, at least 15 minutes for questions. I've only got 2 more slides here. Okay. I want to give you a sense of the kind of support that you can avail yourself of here. So very briefly, I'm calling it pro forma guidance, and that's really just like the formality of your high school college counselor. Maybe you're at a private school, your college counselor is a little bit more involved, but usually it's not super tailored to each student. It's some general guidance about how to choose a college and what is this process, and maybe they'll look at your essay and give you some thoughts, but it's not super handholdy and hands-on. We've got a lot of people who just work on the essays. They're not going to help you build your candidacy or understand your values, but they'll say, okay, you've got an idea for an essay. I can help you write it. And of course, we want to make sure we're staying clear of any ethical gray areas. We don't want people writing for our students. In fact, your students' authentic voice is one of the most important pieces that needs to shine through in the application. But people can help you understand, what is the goal of this kind of essay? What are the readers looking for? And, other things like style and grammar edits and things like that. They can help you with that. And then you've got comprehensive consulting, which helps you build your candidacy, plan the applications, build your school list, and then of course keep you on a writing plan to get it all done, and can help you even navigate. Maybe you've got a number of admissions or you're on a wait list. They can help you navigate that as well. And there are a bunch of different people who do this kind of work. At the kind of lowest credential area, you've got just a student who got into a school and maybe a parent whose kid got into a school and now they are trying to position themselves as experts. We see a lot of these, particularly on social media. There is usually somebody in a neighborhood who is the person that everybody goes to for college applications, but you want to make sure you know what their credentials are. You've got high school counselors, and then you have former admissions officers who are also in this space. And people on my team are high school counselors and former admissions officers. There's a lot of free advice out there. Some of it is very good, right? They're blogs. I mean, I have a blog. It's totally free. You're here. This is a free session, right? There is good advice out there that's free, but of course, know who it's coming from. There's a lot on TikTok and YouTube that I just feel like is really damaging, particularly to students' mental health, because they really lean into this narrative that you have to do everything in order to even have a chance. And that's just not always true. So be careful. Figure out who your kids are listening to. If you are hiring a well-credentialed person, you can expect to pay $200 an hour and up. There are people who charge in the thousands per hour. Signet is between $300 and $550 an hour, depending on the expertise of the consultant you're working with. And then some people do bundles of hours or a comprehensive package. And sometimes these packages will be like $3,000 to $6,000, all the way up to, I've heard some companies out there are charging $500,000 to $750,000. So you decide what kind of investment you want to make on this, just to give you a sense of what's out there. And then no matter what kind of person or how much you're paying, I think these are really the things you need to focus on when evaluating whether you want to bring someone into your family, essentially to advise you and your child, right? Your confidence level in this person is extremely important, but so is your student's level of engagement with them and their trust in them, right? You could love a person, but if your student doesn't like them or doesn't, feel comfortable with them, this is going to go nowhere. Right. So you got to keep those two things in mind. Background and expertise we just talked about. Fear versus strength-based, I think, is also really important. This is somebody who's going to be working with your child. And if you see their marketing saying something like, you don't have a chance unless you do X, Y, and Z, you got to think about, is that how you want someone talking to your child? Right? I think that's really important, because often that leads to a student disengaging or a sense of alienation from their values, which you don't want, right? You want to work with somebody who shares your values. Communication reliability. I get calls every year from people who say, we hired somebody 2 years ago, they're not answering my emails, or we can't get into a meeting with them, so we need somebody new. All right. So make sure, even in the sales process, that this person is responsive to you, that they're meeting your expectations for how responsive you want this person to be in your life. You've got people who work in a team, right? Here at Signet, we've got 9 or 10 people, and we work in a team. We talk all the time. We help each other out. Like if I'm a subject matter expert in this thing and the consultant who is working with the student is not, they will bring me in to talk to the student and the family. And that's normal. At Signet, we do a lot of back channeling and supporting of each other. You also want to think about their quality controls. At Signet, because we have this team approach, we're very collaborative, we do 3 types of peer review. We do the college list, where we share it with another member of the team and they give us feedback. We do it with the early applications, and we do it with the regular applications, because we know this is super high stakes. We want to make sure we've got some serious professional eyes on it before your kid hits submit or commits to a college list. You want to see what their past results are. Now, past results are not a promise that they can get your student into those specific schools. Of course, it always depends on the student, but that'll give you a sense of what kinds of institutions they have experience with, right? If you really want your kid to go to a military academy and they've never worked with a student who's applied to a military academy, maybe they're not the person for you. Or I was just talking to somebody recently, their daughter all of a sudden wants to go to nursing school, and the consultant they're working with has never done a nursing application before, and they're a little worried about that. Industry affiliations, I think, are also important to check. There is the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, that's NACAC, which we're a member of. There's the IECA, Independent Educational Counselor Association. There's the HECA, which is, I think, Higher Education Consultants Association. These are 3 really great organizations. They sort of enforce some ethical standards and some standard operating procedures that you can really trust them. And then their capacity, and I'm going to stop talking after this. How many students do they take on a year? Are you confident that your student is going to get the attention that they need from a person who is working with 35 students versus 2 or 3 students, right? So keep that in mind. I think that it's really important that you find a good match if you are going to bring someone in to help with this. All right, I'm going to pause and take your questions. I see one in the chat right now, which I will get to. In the meantime, I am offering a 1-hour strategy session at a huge discount from my normal rate, which is $5.50 an hour. The strategy session is 1 hour with me at $179. You scan right there, you'll get right to my calendar. You can book the time that works for you, and we will run the pyramid for your student and your situation. You'll come away with my thoughts on what their strategy should be, areas, the gaps that you might want to bridge, and resources for how to do that. So please don't hesitate to sign up for one of those if that's of interest. And I will leave that up while we start taking questions. So Michelle asks, given the current context, do you advise not to mention being an active member of a Jewish youth organization? That's a great question, and I'm sure it's on a lot of people's mind. I don't think you should try to hide anything from the student or from the college, because think about it. If a college is going to ding your student for being a member of a Jewish youth organization, or let's say even a Palestinian youth organization, if we're going to go there, that's probably not a college you want your student at, right? So think about the duration of time your student is going to need to be at an institution. You want them to feel welcome. You don't want them to feel that they have to hide an important part of their identity, right? So I say, if it's important to your student, put it on the application, and then the colleges will tell you who they are based on how they make their decisions, right? I know that feels risky. You might be thinking, oh, well, we won't get into this college because they seem like they're on that side of the issue or whatever. But again, think about your child at that school for 4 years. If that's really a place you want them to be, if they won't be accepted because of their identity. Claire asks, is the strategy session for parent or student or both? It's open. I know it can be hard to get a student to just dive right into this, but if you have one of those students, I am always happy to talk with a student, but mostly I expect parents to show up to this.
Hi, Sheila, this is Khadija.
Hi, Khadija.
A quick question for you. So a student who's primarily going to be applying on the basis of academics as their strength, I've heard conflicting opinions of if it's a student that, let's say what you showed is a straight A student and they've done well in higher level courses, that doesn't show any struggle. You know your child's struggle, but I've heard comments like, oh, this kid got all A's. Where did this kid struggle? Versus if your child gets a B or C, then you're like, yeah, there's a struggle. Next time they got an A. But now, why would school look at the application of a kid who has B or C? So this is so confusing. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, let me try to reflect the question back to you. It seems like you're thinking a student has to have some evidence of struggle in order to be seriously considered. Is that right?
That's one side of the coin.
Uh-huh. Sure. Well, okay. I will try to answer this more generally. I know you're students, so I won't give too much away. um, but colleges don't necessarily need to see your students struggle. They ask about struggles because that's often where the growth happens, right? In fact, if you look at research about how we learn as humans, it's when we struggle that we learn best. We retain more information, we use creativity and problem solving, right? So that's often why they're asking about a struggle. It builds character, right? And it doesn't have to be an academic struggle in order to show them that your student knows how to handle adversity, has learned or grown in any way, right? In fact, the way I see values is that they come from some sort of struggle. It could have been an external conflict with a friend or family member, something like that, but often it's an internal conflict, right? Internal, that they have to figure out, how do I want to act in this situation? And there is some, whisper, a higher voice in their mind that's saying, this is what I think is right. And I'm going to make that choice, even though it may not be, the most socially acceptable one, or the one that's going to win me the most cool points, or, whatever it is, but they are making a choice because they've had an internal struggle. And those are the stories that I think are actually much more powerful than, I was struggling in this class and I worked really hard and I brought it up to an A. Right? That's not that interesting of a story, right? Lots of people can tell that, right? But when a student has to make hard decisions about where to spend their time, or what kind of friendships to maintain, or they have to choose between, they love doing art in their free time or they're going to do more science research, those are the kinds of struggles that the colleges like to hear about, right? I don't know if that answers your complete question, but am I on the right track here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Okay, we got a couple more questions here. How do you draw out the non-talking teenage boy? Oh my God, Christina, such a good question. Um, they're hopefully they're talking to somebody, right? They might talk to their friends more than they talk to you. There's maybe a coach at school or a teacher that they, for whatever reason, they just open up to. And this is where mentors can be really, really helpful. I was talking to somebody earlier today that our kids don't always feel comfortable showing up with their full selves in front of their parents. That's for a lot of reasons, not like you did anything wrong. A lot of time they're also just trying to keep themselves secret while they figure it out, right? So the way we do it is, we match students with people we think they're going to like. There's a shared interest or a personality trait that we know they're going to connect on, and that's how we really do it. But also we take a more of a coaching posture. We're not telling them you have to do it this way, here's your formula for success. We bring them along in their understanding so they understand intuitively, and oftentimes they're coming up with these ideas, which means it has more staying power. And it's builds our confidence a little bit more to share more. They're coming up with these ideas of how we can demonstrate this or that, or what stories we can tell. And of course, it's never, I'm going to sit them down at a computer and say, right. It's more conversational. I'm taking notes while they're answering questions that I'm asking them. Sometimes we're watching movie clips, and I'll say, well, now if this movie was about you, what would be in this clip? Right. And so much rich detail can come out of a discussion like that, where we're coming at, an essay topic from a different angle. Right. And that's really what my team is great at, like establishing that rapport and relationship and using really creative ways to help a student come out of their shell a little bit. I hope that helps. Meg asks, how do you suggest we balance the possibly higher chance of getting in if the student applies to a new department that is built versus the risk with which this is coming, meaning it's not an established department, right? So those headlines I shared with you, right? Of course, you don't want to just make a decision based on a headline. You want to do your research, right? So Colby is starting this Department of Computational and Data Science. Maybe it already exists, but they're funding it. You want to look at who's teaching, what kind of classes are required of students who major in that area, and talk to as many people as you can, right? call the Colby admissions office and they'll put you in touch with a student who's in that area. They might even put you in touch with a faculty member. And you can ask those questions of how do you measure success? And how can we be sure that this brand new department is going to last and is going to be good? Right. There's a reason that if we're talking about computer science, the famous places are good at it, like Cornell, right? I mean, they've been around for a long time and they have a lot of money. They've invested a lot, right? And so that reputation builds on itself. But these other places need a place to start, right? And the other piece of this, the unsaid conversation, is we're all hoping our kids will get great jobs, right? And we're worried if they don't go to the right college, they will never get into the right company or industry, right? And that is a legitimate fear, but really only for a few industries, right? They've done the research. It happens in financial services and it happens in law. And that's more about the law school you go to, not the undergraduate institution you go to, right? Financial services, I should say consulting and law. Are ones that really have these strong biases for a certain type of school. If your student really wants to go into one of those fields, and I will tell you, I don't know a student who really wants to be an investment banker. They don't even know what it is. Yeah, maybe they see, okay, there's a lot of money and you get to live this like glamorous lifestyle in New York City or whatever, but they don't really know what it is on a day to day. But if you have one of those students who is sure that's what they want to do, then, you put yourself on a different track. And that's not to say you can't get into those industries from other schools, but that's what the data is showing, that those industries really do select for certain schools. But we also have to think about the advent of AI is changing that landscape and how much the brand of your degree matters. What matters more is your ability to pivot, your adaptability, your ability to learn and unlearn and relearn, all of those things. And, there are a lot of people saying, it's the philosophy degree that is actually going to be most valuable in the future of work. So there's a lot to consider, and we're at this very interesting moment that I can't give you like a straight answer. But also it's also going to depend on your risk tolerance. Right. Colby is an excellent school. I can't imagine that they are going to have a failure of a computer science department. Right. So do your research. Mia asks, do you work with younger students or only rising high schoolers? We do work with 8th graders and up. Every once in a while we work with a 7th grader, especially if they're taking an SSAT to go to a private high school. So yep, that's the age. What do you recommend in terms of preparing younger students for standardized testing, especially if they've been in more progressive educational environments with minimal testing? Well, that's a great question. And I will say most of our SSAT, ISEE students, that's the test you get into a private high school, come from those more progressive kinds of schools where parents are always like, I don't know if they really learned math or they've never done a standardized test before. This is where meeting the student where they are is really important. So we always start with some sort of diagnostic test because we want to see, well, what are your natural instincts? And then we kind of plot a strategy from there. Oh my gosh, so many good questions here. I'm going to try to move on. But Mia, if you want to talk about testing up, send me an email. We'll talk all about it. Amy asked, you mentioned Georgetown's values. Are the colleges so vastly different? Can you tell a few other snapshots? I don't think I'm going to be the best person to rattle them off, but like Georgetown service is a really big one. Dartmouth community is a really big one. And what you should just do is go to the school's website and look at their mission statement, or some of them have a list of core values and you could just look right at that. You also want to match that with like, what are you seeing in the headlines, right? Are they living up to their values? Because that I think is a big question right now. Oh, Dan, should we hide autism? Student is high performing, top high school, students overcome difficulties, but is clearly on the spectrum. It's up to you whether you want to disclose this or not, and how much you want to disclose. If you don't think it's impacting his academic performance, you don't have to say anything. And, once you do get into a school, you can talk to their student support center, and, the student support center and the admissions offices are totally separate and they're like HIPAA protection, so they can't disclose information. But if, the thing I would advise you to do is when you're researching schools is make sure you're looking at what kind of supports do they have for students on the spectrum. I did a podcast recently with Eric Endlick. I don't know if it came out this month or it's coming out next month, but you should listen to my podcast. And he talks about how to find the right supports and what to disclose. I know we're over time, but if anyone has more questions, I am happy to stay on. And I really do hope you'll sign up for a strategy session. You can see I love talking about this stuff. So here's my contact information. You can always send me a direct email, call the office, visit our website. Because you registered for this webinar, you're going to get our free mini strategy guide for parents. That's going to come out in a series of emails over like the next week. And it's got some really great content. You will also get the recording of this webinar in case you want to watch a replay or share it with a friend. But thank you all so much for coming. And I really hope this was helpful.